Hello, you're watching news from Kazakhstan. It is Wednesday, November 28th. These are the headlines. Who to blame? Who is to stand trial in the case over extremist media and political parties, unregistered Alga or printed Respublika? While the court is reviewing inaccuracy, Stan.tv portals receives a notice to suspend its activities. Hopeless. Murdered Argankirgen soldiers' relatives refused to take part in the trial over Bordigar Chelach. Inconsistencies noted in witness testimonies. 100 years of expectations. Atral's World War veteran unable to obtain legally allocated apartment. Matvey Kryukov turned 100 years old, yet he is 26 on the waiting list. First hearings in the case of 23 internet publications and 8 newspapers, including Respublika. Around 20 colleagues and civil activists came to support the journalist. Our crew was there to investigate the growing popularity of the state label extremist journalism.
A pre-trial technical session before the actual case of the Golos Respubliki newspaper was held on Tuesday in one of the Almaty's district courts, the day before the state prosecution office filed a lawsuit to recognize 8 newspapers and 23 websites as single Respublika mass media entity and terminate its publication and distribution on the territory of Kazakhstan. At this point, however, it is not clear who exactly will be the trial defendant. They've been trying to resolve procedural issues raised by the fact that a newspaper is basically a creative team rather than a legal or natural entity. This makes filing a lawsuit against it a useless and unlawful procedure. I have no idea what the public prosecution and court will do about that. The decree to suspend the publication of the newspaper has already come into effect. However, lawyer Sergei Utkin points out that there's no way to object to judgment since the suit was filed against a newspaper which is now the only eligible party to request a ruling review. This makes further proceedings impossible until the court identifies a more tangible case respondent. The judge simply wouldn't try a petition unless it is filed by a legal defendant. Meanwhile, the newspaper itself cannot write or file anything, as it's not a natural entity or a company representative. The situation gets really messed up here. In the meantime, a resident of Ust-Kamenogorsk went on one-man pickets in support of independent media near the regional public prosecution office. Her silent protest speaks for itself, rebelling against the government's attempt to suppress the dissenting journalists. The judiciary and law clerks were able to get acquainted with the Golos Respubliki and Vzglyad newspapers' content firsthand, as the fresh issues were available on sale inside the court building. The news vendors claimed that the opposition periodicals are growing in popularity, which was evidenced by the empty stands later that afternoon.
Meanwhile, bailiffs paid a short and friendly visit to Stan.tv editorial office. This is how it transpired.
Hi, we're the staff of Stan Production, and we're filming our office and everything that's going on inside. All right, I'm a court officer, and I brought you the legal notice of the court judgment. In the course of the dialogue revealing the purpose of the court's officer's late visit, the parties learned that the notice in question is a decree on suspension of the Stan TV video portal content distribution. The Medera Regional Court of Almaty ruled that the Ministry of Information as well as the Ministry of Transport and Communication were to assist in enforcing the court judgment. Curiously, however, the office lawyer noted that the lawsuit against mass media was initially filed by a different court, that of the Bostandik district.
Alga Party sent an official letter to Minister of Justice Berik Mashev with copies to the General Prosecutor with a request to conclude the registration process of the political association in the shortest time possible.
The statement says, quote, Almaty Prosecution Office filed a lawsuit against the unregistered National Party Alga, recognizing it as an extremist organization. At the moment, the operation of the party is suspended as the party has no official registration, its legal entity is non-existent, and the organizing committee no longer exists. The organization cannot act as a defendant in the case legal-wise. Due to this, I request to positively resolve the issue with the registration of the National Party Alga until November 29, 2012, to allow party members participate in the trial, end quote.
More on the subject of extremism mixed with terrorism. According to Director of Freedom Kazakhstan Public Organization Vyacheslav Abramov, despite the fact that the two terms are closely related, opposition media can in no way be called extremist due to strict control by the security forces.
Abramov defines terrorist actions as those aimed at intimidating and killing people. Extremism is mainly politically oriented. It is not followed by violent acts. The main danger is how those notions are interpreted today. Extremism doesn't give rise to terrorism. However, extremism can exist without terrorism as well, although it rarely occurs nowadays. Both terrorism and extremism must be appropriately treated by the state. The government must take precautions and carry on adequately fighting against these phenomena.
New refusals to participate in the trial over border guard Vladislav Chelokh in Taldykorgan. This time, several relatives of the murdered soldiers declined to be present in the courtroom. The trial itself is continuing without the defendant. On Tuesday, witnesses from both the prosecution and defense presented their testimonies, many of whom contradicted themselves. Meanwhile, experts confirmed the authenticity of video recordings where Chelokh confesses to committing these mass murders. Our crew was at the hearing with the following report.
On Tuesday, Kazakhstan, the lawyer of Vladislav Chelokh, submitted 3 motions to the judge, all based on video materials from the crime scene. Defense insists on supplementary expert examination that would focus on safes, keys and overturned beds in burned barracks. I request a criminal and ballistic expert examination to determine the angle of damage inflicted on these bedposts, as we need to see which beds these posts connect to and then check if it corresponds with Chelokh's testimony. After listening the attorney, the court moved to questioning witnesses Nikolai Kosinov, Konstantin Gusev and Alexei Bogdanov, all soldiers from the military unit 24/84, who passed military training together with Vladislav Chelokh. The witnesses all mentioned the hot temper of the defendant. How did his hot temper show? Did he scream or shout? Did he fight? No, he didn't shout. Sometimes he would just start talking faster. It was not possible to get a complete psychological profile of Vladislav based on such testimony, since no one remembered any specifics. Witnesses said he was a normal guy who liked to brag, although quite touchy but not bearing grudges. The debates in the court were triggered by testimony from prosecution witnesses, soldiers who first arrived at Arkan-Kirgen to check why there was no connection. Yerlan Kabdrashev's words suddenly no longer corresponded with his initial testimony during the investigation. Nowhere in the testimony did they speak of dogs, and now one of them says that he went to check on the dogs and even gave water to one of them. The second witness says there were no dogs. The first one says he heard them barking and the second didn't hear anything. Are they hard of hearing? Meanwhile, with each new day, fewer and fewer people show up at the hearings. Families of border guards leave the hall. On Tuesday, the mother of Dennis Ray refused to attend the proceedings. She has yet to hold a funeral for her son and asked the judge to allow her to decide for herself when to collect the remains, which are still not fully identified as belonging to Dennis Ray. It's all very hard to bear. Let it be as judges decide, because it will be their way all the same. The law is on their side. I'm just sure of that. After the break, the court carried on watching video footage left from Monday, including the examination of forest ranger Ruslan Kim's remains. According to the investigation, he was killed first during the Arkan-Kirgen massacre.
In the meantime, another trial in Taldykorgan is being held against Alexei Fomin, the head of Sarybakhtır border outpost. At the request of Captain Fomin, the process is open, with journalists and observers in the courtroom.
He's facing several criminal charges, including for concealing information that all communication with the border outpost Arkan-Kirgen was lost for 2 straight days, and nothing was done about it. There are also accusations of power abuse and service forgery. On Tuesday, during the second day of the trial, the parties listened to witness testimonies, with Alexei Fomin's defense team insisting that the investigation failed to prove his guilt on all cited counts. According to lawyers, the prosecution wants to make a scapegoat of the border post chief. Supposedly, Fomin was the only person responsible for communication with the outpost since he was the head of the transit base. But they also have a direct communication line, and the unit itself is responsible for it. Now they only make Fomin liable, and it raises a lot of questions.
Search operations for the Mi-8 helicopter that went missing in Almaty region 3 days ago are taking place underwater. According to Minister of Emergency Situations Vladimir Bashko, small vessels and echo sounders are operating in Lake Alakol, which is included in the search area.
The situation is complicated since smaller lakes in the area are already frozen. The Alakol is covered with sludge ice. The weather conditions there were bad on Monday, which complicated the situation even further. Ahmedjan Yesimov, the mayor of Almaty, and Nurtay Bakayev, the head of the National Security Committee, also joined a meeting with the Prime Minister and Minister of Emergency Situations behind the closed doors. Although the topic of their talks was not revealed, it is likely dealt with the missing Mi-8 helicopter. All communication with the chopper was lost on Saturday when 8 people on board were conducting air inspection of an oil pipeline leading to China. No information about the aircraft crossing the border was reported, and the Emergencies Ministry insists that no classified documents or equipment were on board. Currently, officials are speculating about various possible scenarios ranging from an unfortunate incident to equipment failure and have already asked French specialists for help. The general director of Kazakhstan, the company which hired the helicopter, believes that it is too soon to consider provision of financial aid to the families of the missing crew. Right now, it is premature to talk about financial assistance. We hope for a favorable outcome. Maybe the helicopter had to make, as they say, emergency landing. Let's not wish for the worst, but hope for a positive outcome, shall we?
Chairman of Kazakhstan's Public Commission, Marat Bashimov, asserted on Tuesday in Astana that there were no forced purchases of the national IPO shares.
So far, we've received no complaints of such kind, but we will verify them should we receive any. The participation in this action is volunteer-based. It's illegal to force anyone to take part in it. Bashimov's logic is very clear. No complaints, no precedent. However, the head of Kazpost has recently confirmed that Pavlodar region residents are forced to buy securities. In fact, some representatives of Samruk-Kazanafan believe that forcing people to purchase shares is not a violation, and citizens should start giving securities to their families, friends and acquaintances as gifts for various holidays. Rather than giving strange presents imported from China or Turkey to your loved ones on weddings and anniversaries, I say give them stocks instead.
A celebration in honor of the upcoming presidential holiday was held on Tuesday in the last bastion of Kazakhstan's democracy. The historical building in Almaty, where the Republic's Supreme Council bore witness to heated political battles, is now a scene of high praise. Our crew was able to dig up archived footage of those times and share them with our viewers.
Jasatan, the youth wing of the ruling party, is busy preparing students for the ceremony of celebrating the day of the first president. Sergei Dyachenko is the speaker of the day. He used to be one of the main physical instructors of the country back when the Supreme Council was holding its sessions in this room. Nowadays, Dyachenko is a deputy speaker of the parliament, also known as a puppet senate. Dear friends, be proud of your president and your nation. Be proud of Kazakhstan. Show your love to the country, its people and the president. I sincerely wish you prosperity. Everyone can speak from the podium today in the best liberal tradition. Poet Maraltai Rainbekuli uses the opportunity to read his works. About 20 years ago, a member of the Soviet Supreme Council, Asıl Murat Turganbekuli, couldn't even imagine that someday this will be. Nowadays, Turganbekuli is an official, and he talks about the personal day of the president. I believe we truly need the day of the first president, because this is the first experience of presidential government for our country, and it's quite successful. Back in the day, even if we couldn't foresee it, we still had faith it would happen. This is when Serik Balsin Abdildin was the chairman of the Supreme Council and one of the key political figures in the country, while now the honorary member of the opposition recalls what kind of historic date the December 1st really is. Unfortunately, the history is twisted, which is very common these days. The Supreme Council marked the December 1st, 1991 as a permanent date for presidential elections. However, everyone ignores it now. The political order in the country and inside the Supreme Council hall is quite different now, and it shows. Even students who are frankly bored by compulsory gala programs are not allowed to leave the premise when they want to.
Civil society also remembered the electoral process and legislation in Kazakhstan. There was an incomplete quorum due to an acute shortage among members of Nur Otan ruling party. Our reporters investigated where else is political deficit observed.
Overall, experts and politicians have negative memories of the last parliamentary elections. Multiple voting, stuffing of ballots and non-transparency of process for observers were all part of the game. Social Democrat Amirjan Kasanov is not pleased with regulations of TV debates, which is the only opportunity for many party activists to get at least some coverage by federal channels. 2 minutes of TV time is not enough to tell the public about the party platform. It already takes 10 seconds to say "Good evening, dear citizens" in Kazakh. The spokesman of Central Election Committee believes that opposition forces should appreciate the government's care and suggests them to be more creative. Since the TV debate is financed from the state treasury, the parties should actually appreciate this opportunity given by the Central Election Committee. This way they can promote themselves during the election campaign. SUVs, tenders and dollars run the ball. Average working Joes are forgotten and pushed aside. The parties give people plenty of promises, while cities and villages remain under oppression of money. People's Communist Party managed to win parliamentary seats after the poem was read during last debates. Vyacheslav Artemyev, the representative of the party cell in Almaty, says that violations didn't occur last elections, but they were insignificant. The communist advises to avoid criticism of the government and treat it with optimistic loyalty. I would advise political parties, public organizations and all other agencies involved in the electoral process to utilize this optimism. Because if we stop believing in improvements, then what's the point of these discussions, public organizations and all other efforts if we believe that we're doomed from the start? Experts though don't share this optimism and say that the law on elections still needs amendments. It is similar to C-graded paper of a college student. Since his work consists of statements pulled from different sources with no logical connection between them, the result is something incomprehensible. Unfortunately, this law represents the C-graded paper. The CEC spokesperson summed up everything by saying that comments and remarks of all speakers will be taken into consideration as usual.
The National Action Plan for Human Rights 2009-2012 is not only not executed, but outright ignored, conclude national experts. Authors of the plan, however, seem to hold a different viewpoint, although not yet voicing it. In the next report, we attempted to find out why officials are in no rush to fulfill the prescribed democratic principles.
3.5 years ago, the president of Kazakhstan approved a document intended to regulate human rights protection mechanisms that appear to be quite unpopular with the government officials. Experts are convinced that since then, the situation with human rights in Kazakhstan rapidly went downhill, which is evidenced by the recent state prosecutors' lawsuits against political organizations and mass media. We consider their actions to be unlawful and infringing on the constitutional rights to freedom of speech and protection, not to mention other norms and international standards. We all know that the democratic society of Kazakhstan needs sources of alternative information. Some of the experts suggest adopting the neighboring country's experience of civil society opposing the government's attempts to establish total control. The new laws are unlikely to help. We should rather revise and enhance the existing legislation. It would probably make sense for journalist communities and human rights organizations to file retaliation lawsuits against the authorities, just like it happened in Ukraine and Russia. There are organizations that succeeded through the years of litigation. In Kazakhstan, we still hope for a mysterious new law that would finally enforce obeying the current legislation. These words were echoed on Tuesday by a rather passive behavior of government agency representatives, some of whom openly ignored the discussion of the national blueprint for human rights protection as if it was inconsistent with their own plans and objectives.
Alone against the system, Karaganda resident was able to win $33,000 through litigation from the Ministry of Internal Affairs for 2 years of illegal detention. The police tossed illegal drugs to the young man and put him in jail. More up next on The Piece of Freedom.
This footage shows how tricky the police can be, as quite unexpectedly Rustem Kokozov was found with heroin in his pocket. This isn't mine, you just had it in your glove. What are you doing, guys? This isn't right. Why are you planting this on me? Rustem has been on police radars for some time now, right after he told the public about a similar case of the police planting heroin on his friend, who was lucky to be later acquitted by court. The police wanted revenge and finally got Rustem sentenced to drug possession to 3 years, of which he spent 2 in custody. The district court convicted me as the judge didn't even listen to me once, despite strong evidence in my favor. The regional court supported him and didn't listen to me either. Only the Supreme Court was objective in considering my case. While in prison, Rustem Kokozov decided to prove his innocence, appealing to numerous organizations. It was not after 2 years that the justice prevailed finally. Rustem was released and demanded a compensation of $66,000 for the time spent in custody. The court ruled that the money was to be paid by the finance ministry and not the police. However, the ministry didn't agree to the amount and cut it down to $6,000. The Court of Cassation stepped in and the final ruling made Rustem liable for a compensation of $33,000. I want to thank the head of the regional court, as this was the right decision, both humane and legal. A criminal case was filed against the police officer, but he was pardoned during the course of the investigation. The judge who had passed an unfair judgment is still leading trials, while Kokozov himself says he went to law not for the material compensation, but to set a precedent. After all, innocent people can end up behind bars in Kazakhstan, but none of them dare to go against the system.
And the battle rages on. World War veteran Matvey Kryukov is demanding housing from the state. The veteran turned 100 years old a few days ago, but his turn for the apartment has not yet come. Meanwhile, the centenarian is leading a healthy lifestyle. The next and final report is on the special tactics in the fight against bureaucrats.
The more you rub it, the better. Matvey Kryukov massages his ears twice a day. This is the secret of his longevity, says the veteran of the Great Patriotic War, who celebrated his 100th birthday recently. Kryukov was born during the reign of Russian Tsar Nicholas and saw the revolution. He lost count of all the general secretaries of the USSR he's seen in his lifetime. For the last 20 years, he lives in an independent country, yet the Great Patriotic War is still his most vivid memory. I fought to liberate Budapest and Vienna and then moved to Ukraine. I received certificates of appreciation for this for each city. In civilian life, there are a few dozen square meters which the veteran has to fight for. He had not yet received an apartment promised to him many years ago by the state. Therefore, healthy living is not just a whim, but a vital necessity, or a survival special tactics combat, if you will. In the meantime, the veteran lives with his niece, who is not in a better financial situation either. VC trips are the hardest. Last year he fell down, but luckily managed not to break anything. The winter is coming along with slippery roads. This is a problem too. The city administration is aware of Matvey Kryukov's housing problem, but nobody can help him. Everything in its own time, say the officials. Matvey Kryukov currently resides with his grandson's family. He has no housing. He is on the waiting list since September 2011 as a veteran of the World War II. He is number 26. It is hard to tell whether the old man will manage to get his own apartment, considering the efficiency of officials. In the meantime, Matvey himself keeps his head up, fishing, jogging and following a strict diet, basically doing everything to live up to his housewarming party.
This is all we have left for now. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.